Okay, before we start, can I have some questions answered?
Okay.
I want to talk about Thursday's meeting. Can we run over how that's going to be and what Hester Street is doing? Are they sponsoring it?
It's hard to fully understand with the echo. I'm hearing it on my side too, though. I'm not quite sure how to rectify it.
I think that was Marie speaking. I'm not sure.
Julia.
Mm-hmm.
You were speaking?
Oh, I was saying, I'm not sure how to rectify the echo on my side, but we can definitely talk through Thursday. Hey, Marie, I think you're on mute.
I just realized that.
Sorry.
I said,
It felt like it was important.
I said, is it possible that maybe there are two people in one location with the speaker on?
Only for the stuff with the
It sounds like it's in your office, Marie.
So I think it's because they're using a headset. All right.
Two.
Okay, is this still an echo? I don't understand this. I disconnected the headset and I'm using the camera with the microphone. Is it any better?
It's fine for me. I can hear you.
Are you on? I don't see it. Where are you?
Right now. You're unmuted.
Hello, we're still trying to resolve the echo.
Should we go ahead and get started? It's 6:40, just looking at the clock.
Send a message in the chat and it doesn't let me. Yeah, I don't have that
Thursday.
capacity.
I couldn't hear any of that. I'm so sorry.
I said I was trying to send a message by the chat and it doesn't let me. I can't send.
We're not off to a great start.
WebEx sucks.
Okay. Maria, I was able to hear you if you want to restate what you're going to send in the chat.
I was saying, do we need quorum? If we don't, then we should get started.
So I still don't have the option to share screen. I can't, like, I'm not allowed to share screen.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you. ¿Cuándo viene? Oh, sorry.
Okay, so you're good to go.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, so I'll hand it over to Caesar, but just to remind everybody. Oh, so sorry about this echo. This is really kind of like a trial run for, I think it's good that we're doing this for the meeting on Thursday. So really assuming that folks are coming into this training with a very bare bones understanding of zoning.
Right.
Okay, so let us get started. Okay. So the purpose of this presentation is going to be crazy. Is to understand what zoning is and why it matters. Build familiarity with zoning terms and policies. Identify opportunities to advance community opportunities. And empower residents to get involved. Feel free to let me know if you can't understand anything. And
how are you guys doing with understanding? Do you think that we should pass around a call-in number and call in, and then we can send you a PDF of the presentation? I feel like this is going to be really difficult.
What do you mean? How would that be different? Sending in a call-in number?
Just the feedback. Are you guys getting the feedback, or is it just on my side?
No.
We can call in and mute so they continue sharing the screen, but the voices will be heard on the phone.
If you guys aren't having an issue hearing us, then we'll move forward. Sorry, I thought everybody was having an echo.
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Feel free to like stop, interrupt, go off mute, and stop us or use the chat function if you have any challenges. Sorry, Caesar, go for it.
No worries. Okay. So zonings are, so what is zoning? Zonings are the regulations that determine what development and activities are permitted and prohibited in an area. Zoning has a large impact on our daily lives and affects the visual character and the lived experience of the neighborhood. Zoning is a negotiation. It's a balance between the public and private property rights. How much open space a neighborhood needs versus how much things can be developed. One second. Zoning has two fundamental components. The first is where each type of land use, residential, commercial, or manufacturing can go, and what can go together and what should be separated. So questions that come out of this are usually like, where are the commercial corridors? What are those manufacturing zones? Where are the manufacturing zones? Airports, theaters, districts, etc. It also determines what can be built. So again, like the size and bulk of the neighborhood, the shape of the buildings, and the setbacks and parkings, how much open space each lot needs. And it also raises questions like which neighborhoods are low density, which neighborhoods are high density, what types of buildings can be built, and how much building can be on this plot of land. So with that introduction, does anybody have any questions? Is everybody good? Great. So with that introduction, we're going to pivot into like racial equity and public health that zoning impacts. So zoning is a very powerful tool, and it can influence how a neighborhood feels like. So being able to shape areas that from like it being a full with high rises to 1 to 2 story houses like the suburbs in Long Island, and everything in between. It also determines how and where people can live. The more compact and dense the neighborhood is, the more affordable it tends to be. And that has led to some exclusionary practices, which we'll talk about later in future slides, but zoning also affects where folks can live, how healthy folks are. So with the types of uses the neighborhood can have, and it can shape things like how many supermarkets there are or there aren't. If there aren't a lot of supermarkets, it's called a food desert. Also, how close residents live to pollution because of the proximity of industrial zones and industrial uses or highways, and also how much open space there is in a neighborhood. Most importantly, it impacts how we interact with the built environment. So do we need to drive to get anywhere, or can we walk it? When you walk it, do you have to cross 6 lanes of traffic or just 2? And then these are some questions that we'll present to you guys or the general public, which is how does zoning impact your neighborhood, and what changes have you experienced over time as a result of zoning? Any questions? All good? Okay, so the history of zoning. Before zoning existed, and since we live in New York City, people often built as high as they could, as high as they could, and as densely as they could, which resulted in neighborhoods being overcrowded, their infrastructures overwhelmed, and serious health conditions to its residents. A key example of that is like the tenements in Lower Manhattan, where tons of people were jam-packed in apartments with no windows. But in the early 1900s, with the rise of skyscrapers, life at the pedestrian level became very dark and congested, and is something that we can still experience today if we walk down the financial district. So in 1916, New York City enacted the nation's first comprehensive zoning resolution to promote and protect the public health, safety, and general welfare of the people, and enacted setbacks and separated areas from separated areas from residential and industrial uses, so that people can live healthier lives. And then after that, in 1964, with the rise of the automobile, it allowed people to travel to much greater distances. So it started to creating new urban design ideas for more auto-centered development. And it also introduced bulk regulations to, again, help with the building density, the increasing density of the city. So who were the rule makers? Most of them were white, wealthy, affluent men who designed with models such as these, very large scale, and they often forgot about the pedestrian life. It was mostly about how the city looked from above, and not so much how it looked from the street level. And the rules that they enacted created something called exclusionary zoning practices, which made it harder for neighborhoods to be more integrated. One way of that happened was through redlining. Redlining is the discriminatory practice of banks denying mortgages to people of color, and also loans, making it harder for people to renovate their house or even acquire a home. And another version of exclusionary zoning practices was income restrictions. As the white middle class moved to the suburbs because they could afford to, the suburbs became the definition of the American dream. But again, it was only achievable to those who could afford 1 to 2 cars, high property taxes, high taxes for schools, etc. So that was another way zoning started to exclude people. And its impact, it created segregated communities where white areas organized to keep unwanted people out, and disadvantaged Black and Brown communities were situated where residents could not move up from because of all the kind of limitations that they had through redlining and etc. So the segregated communities still persist today. This map is the distribution of races in New York in 2016. And as you can see, the communities continue to be separated across very clear lines that have just started to dissolve. But it's still very, you could very much see where the white neighborhoods are, where the Black neighborhoods are, where the Hispanic neighborhoods are, etc. Another impact of those rules was environmental racism, which is the placement of industrial waste facilities in marginalized low-income communities, and that in turn created a series of health problems, just like asthma, cancer, and other chronic ailments. Another impact is systemic disinvestment with limited resources, poor housing conditions, and overcrowding. Neighborhoods tended to deteriorate quickly. And urban renewal, which was kind of another tactic to get rid of the slums, further displaced and divided neighborhoods. So this image right here is of the Bronx, when the Bronx was burning in the early 1900s, late 1900s. Julia? Oh, you're on mute.
Okay. I didn't hear my feedback. So in order to address some of these areas of concerns and injustices, there's been a real push to have more community-led practices. So things like community boards, people engaging in local civic practices to make sure that decisions that are made that are so critical to the way we live regarding zoning is informed by the residents who are living in those neighborhoods. We've seen over the years the intersectionality, or how these various components, race, income, land use, kind of work as a network. We're understanding that better. And there's additional voices of different backgrounds are speaking up and starting to lead these conversations. Organizing has been something that communities have done for decades. I think more and more we're seeing it now around zoning issues. The de Blasio administration in recent times, to go to the next slide, really had one of de Blasio's key initiatives was kind of affordable housing. So his stake that 300,000 new and affordable units, either brand new or preserved, would be in place by the year 2026. I think that came in conjunction with a lot of the rezonings or rewriting of the zoning rules for neighborhoods that has had has been met with mixed reviews from both communities and then the government, but it's certainly a first step in opening up the process to something that is more public and is more participatory. These are some quotes from folks who have participated in rezonings. We'll get a little bit more into the process of how rezonings are implemented later on. But really it is, you're kind of constantly seeing it's this kind of weighing between development rights and then the needs and the priorities of individual communities. And it's not always that easy to do. It seems like a simple thing, but as we're getting up against changing neighborhood character, increasing density, or putting a density cap on a neighborhood, that really brings into question a lot of issues that has, as we saw through some of the practices that have occurred in the past, some real issues about the full impact of how those decisions land in place. To date, de Blasio, there have been 6 neighborhood rezonings since 2015. I think there are 15 more slated, and they've all kind of like been received with different levels of success. If you go to the next slide, the city and community boards have tried different ways to work together to make zoning kind of like the most effective. And I'm not sure if we've quite hit on that, but different tactics have been used, such as, working with community board members and city council and the preservation and development to work together to kind of steward rezoning processes in conjunction with one another. There's been other processes where community boards and neighborhoods have put an agenda forward, and then the city has taken that and kind of crafted a rezoning around the community's agenda. So there's many different ways that the city has tried to adapt to this over the years. And then these kind of discussion questions that we're putting in just as a commentary were kind of an idea of things that we could prompt folks if they're going through this online, and we'll have talking points that go with the slides, but something that could kind of like prompt them to think about some of the content that we're sharing. Go to the next slide.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about zoning as it relates to Community Board 1. So CB1, as you all know, is Greenpoint and Williamsburg. It has a population of 185,000 residents, but nearly 50% of its land use is slated for residential. The other 50 is manufacturing, and there's just a small sliver for commercial and open space. It contains nearly 8% of the city's entire manufacturing zone land, and 1/10 of it is 1/10 of its land and buildings are within the floodplain. CB1 also has special districts, and special districts are supplement and modify the underlying zoning to respond to a neighborhood's distinct characters, issues, or goals. So this can look like historic districts, enhanced commercial districts, coastal risk districts, and natural area districts. And CB1 has a mixed-use district, which allows residential properties to be developed in manufacturing zoned areas. CB1, another important zoning feature, which is not unique to CB1, it's found all over the place, but it helps identify kind of commercial corridors or commercial overlays. And commercial overlays are, again, allow commercial uses in residential zoned areas, and they're usually along main streets and avenues. So CB1's commercial corridors are along Lee Avenue, Metropolitan Avenue, Avenue of Puerto Rico, and Nassau Avenue, to name a few. And CB1 has seen a lot of changes in the last 20 years. It was predominantly meant for manufacturing, as you can see in the early 2000s slide. But in 2005, a large portion of the waterfront was made to residential. And then this created a huge increase in large developments throughout the areas that were out of context. They could build as high as they want. So it was rezoned. A portion of it was rezoned in 2009. So it could be more contextual, and it could better preserve the neighborhood character. And this is how the changes look like on the ground. As you can see, most prominently is the Domino Sugar Factory and Park, where there's going to be a massive development. But also, like, the type of commercial uses have also changed to be more catered to a newer type of resident. And that's where this slide kind of gets at. As you can see from the map, rent prices have increasingly become more expensive, especially in the areas that have been within the areas that have been rezoned. There has been a 52% increase in non-family households, and the amount of adults with college degrees and have higher incomes have increased to about 40%.
The Community Board 1 is also made up of a group of individuals. So CB1 is one of 59 community boards across New York City. Like all community boards, it's made up of up to 50 members. Some are appointed by borough presidents and some are voted in. It's really a fantastic way to participate in local government and to really have a voice. Community boards are really seen as the local level of government and really the voice of the community, and they're very much responsible for listening to the various concerns and that are coming out from residents, the diverse range of residents, assessing community needs, and then making recommendations that have really critical impact on the way that the neighborhood develops and is formed. And again, it's really like striking the balance, and the community board is really in the position to strike the balance between weighing development and then the preservation of character. And I think the preservation of character can get at things like the actual community members down to the look and the feel of the space that we kind of talked about a little bit earlier on. The community is responsible for many things. These are kind of the three general bucket areas of responsibility that they have. One is to really oversee land use. So it's primarily what we're talking about today, how the space is being stewarded, what can be built and what can't be built. And then they're also making and stewarding financing or budgetary money. So determining what are the priorities for the specific geography where city dollars should be spent. And then they're also responsible for really day-to-day processes of citizen complaints, almost like the 311 desk of the community. So really essential function. For the purpose of this kind of like next section, we're really going to be focusing on community boards and how they touch different land use elements. There's 3 big chunks kind of work that the community boards tend to steward in a very direct way. One is something called uniform land use review processes. This is a process that really dictates and rewrites areas, like large areas of zoning within the neighborhood itself. We'll get into the ULURP process, as it's referred to, a little bit later. And then also they store it and weigh in on and provide recommendations regarding special use permits and zoning variances. Those are kind of similar in some ways to a land use review, but at a more finite scale that doesn't have the ramification impacts that something that would go through the ULURP process has. And then they also have the ability to kind of put forward their own community board development plans or their own development plans, how they want to see the community being developed. This is something that all community boards have the right to do. However, how the system is structured with the number of steps and the amount of financing that's required for those steps, such as environmental review processes, a community board doing that and sorting that on their own can be quite difficult, just given financial challenges and capacity. Some of those community plans, in order to get through a large review process similar to ULURP, could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then there's so many ways to get involved, and I think part of this kind of, I mean, I guess to take a step aside, I think part of the goals is really to try to get people to want to participate and excited to know who you guys are and what y'all are doing. So really encouraging folks, and we should probably include like numbers and contact information, but calling the community board with any questions, concerns, or thoughts that they have, attending monthly meetings, and better yet, kind of like attending and participating and speaking up, sharing thoughts in monthly meetings, becoming a member of the community board, and joining one of many committees, this being one, the finance committee, is one way to continue that involvement. And something else that is really near and dear and kind of helps guide the land use conversation when it gets to the community board are the priorities and the goals that are coming from the community itself. These are CB1's stated goals at the moment. They tend to fall under these 4 categories of balanced development, affordability, diversity, and resiliency. More specific, really looking to kind of strike a balance of industry, manufacturing, and residential. So making sure that all of those things can kind of coexist within CB1's territory to create a healthy and sustainable neighborhood, creating affordable housing, but also affordable manufacturing and commercial options. And I think when we're talking about affordability, CB1 is really thinking about it not just that it's affordable, but affordable for who. So at what level of affordability are we talking about, to make sure that residents who have been long-term community members can really retain, live, and thrive within CB1's boundaries. Working to continue to create a mixed use of spaces that are attractive and welcoming to the diverse group of community members and residents that you have as constituents. And then environmental resiliency and health and sustainability aspects. A lot of the work around the waterfront, flood controls, transit network, stuff like that all speaks to the resiliency of CB1's members and growth. Okay, now we're going to get into some zoning terms and tools. It's kind of the fundamental basics of talking about zoning is kind of knowing what zoning regulates and how it lands in space. So zoning in general is really, it's segmented out very similar to a map or districts, kind of like boundaries. Zoning is something that applies to all parcels of land across the city. It dictates, as Cesar said previously, the types of use, but then also what can be built there. So the density of construction that can happen, the type of building forms, meaning like how set back is the building from the street? Does it have a front yard? Is it required to have a backyard? Does it need to step up as the building gets taller to allow for additional light into the building? In residential units, it dictates the maximum number of dwelling units that a space can have, as well as things like parking, and distance from other buildings. So all of these are things that are kind of going to create the character of individual zoning districts. So we thought we would walk through one lot or site that exists in CB1's boundaries. This is one that has been of debate in the past, but we really wanted to use it to help ground some of the terminology. So the site we're going to be looking at is 40 Quay Street, and this is located right along the waterfront. It is currently a one-story warehouse building. It has some vehicular parking out in front, and it falls under the industrial and manufacturing use. The site, if you're looking at it from a zoning perspective, there's a thing called zoning maps. So the map on the left-hand side of your screen, the pink and yellow one, kind of shows various zoning districts. It shows residential zoning districts in yellow, commercial districts, more of the red, and then manufacturing districts in the purple. This site in particular is under a residential use with a commercial overlay. The way that this shows up on a map, so it's kind of a zoom in on the map on the left is what we're seeing on the right. Zoning is typically read in this, funky way. So the first letter dictates the use, so residential, commercial, or manufacturing. The second number dictates the intensity of use, how intense or dense is that use on site. And then the third letter, which has a hyphen after it, dictates parking. Parking is not always a requirement of certain sites, but so for this site, for 40 Quay Street, it falls under a residential 6 category with a commercial 2 overlay. This is kind of going a little bit further into the types of uses that fall within those use categories: residential, commercial, and manufacturing, and intensity. So intensity is going from lowest intensity on the left-hand side up to highest intensity on the right. Those that are highlighted in the blue color are the zoning categories that can be found in CB1's boundary area. So now that we kind of know the use of the site, we're talking about the density of the site, and based on where the site is located and its zoning, will determine how much you can actually build on that site. A term that is used for zoning is called, or for density, is called floor area ratio, and this is what you'll hear referred to as FAR a lot. This will come up in multiple zoning review meetings or meetings with developers. And what floor area ratio means, it's kind of the ratio of the total building floor area as it relates to the total zoning lot area. So if you had an FAR of 1 and you were building at 1 story on the block with no setbacks, so you could build right up to the lot line, you'd have 100% lot coverage, an FAR at 1, and you'd have a full build out of that block. So what we're seeing on the left. You could also distribute that floor area in different ways. So instead of doing 1 story build out on the site, you could say, hey, I'm going to take half of that building and I'm going to stack it on the other half of the building. It's the same amount of square footage, but it's 50% lot coverage. So what that would allow for is maybe additional green space or plaza space or parking space, but the same amount of buildable area. Conversely, you could do that and subdivide one more time, 25% of lot coverage, same FAR as 1, but stacking, so you're 4 stories tall at 25% of the total width, if that makes sense. So that's kind of the way FAR works. Playing out FAR for 40 Quay Street, the existing FAR as it's built out is 9.9. So the total lot area is 80,000 square feet. Only a portion of that is developed. So there's FAR that is not being built out to its fullest capacity, and that's, if you recall the photo that we saw, where cars are parking in the front of the building. So this building is underdeveloped as it currently stands. The zoning will allow for zoning of residential facility up to 2.4. So right now the building is 0.9, and it could build more than twice its size within as of right. And when we say as of right, we mean without having to go through any sort of community board zoning review process. It's just what you're allowed to build based on what the zoning will allow. So if you were to build a residential building, you could get 2.4. Max FAR would increase the buildable square footage. So right now it's 73,000 square footage built. That would, you could build up to 192,000 square feet. So a considerable increase. It also allows, with the commercial overlay, it also allows for a maximum facility FAR of 4.8. So in theory, you could develop this site as 384,000 square feet of facilities, or a combination of the FAR from residential, so the 192,000 square feet residential, and then the remaining of that to get additional bonus could be developed as facility. So that is kind of the build out on this site that is permitted as of right, not having to go through any sort of community review process regarding zoning anyways. And this just speaks a little bit of that. So roughly in terms of units anyways, it's about 280 residential units are allowed on this site. And what this information tells us, it's really kind of telling us, so like if a developer comes and purchases this site or is looking at this site, they stand to be able to gain much more square footage than what's currently there, which will also bring in like additional dollars for development, to the developer, additional potential units of affordable housing or housing, and can kind of, that information can really is good basis for community boards to use to push back on things that the community board itself wants. So if they're creating community facility as part of their FAR and as part of their pro forma for the building, let's go back to the community board's priorities and ask them questions about, hey, how is this community facility space, or how is this outdoor green space impacting and plugging into CB1's stated priorities? So that's kind of like one way that it can be used.
Hey, so as Julia mentioned, there's a lot of different tactics to help increase the bulk of the building and increase the square footage, which in turn would allow for a lot more built and possibly a lot more money coming in for that developer. So these are a couple of methods that have been used. So incentivized zoning provides additional floor area in exchange for public amenities or affordable housing. So again, using 40 Quay Street as a case study, as of right, its FAR is 2.4, but if they also do inclusionary housing, that bumps up the FAR to 3.6. So they're able to build about a floor more. And then if they have a community facility with inclusionary housing and as of right development, the FAR increases to 4.8. So the more community benefit that it has, the more they are allowed to build. But we do have to be consistent of like inclusionary housing and inclusionary like and income levels, and if those income levels match the income levels of the community itself, and not just like the larger New York City average income. So now we're gonna do how some ways that CB1 can help influence land use and zoning. So there are 3 ways of doing this: uniform land use, which Julia mentioned, ULURP, special use and zoning variances, and CB development plans. So ULURP is a way New York City makes sure big land use decisions that affect the city neighborhoods get reviewed by the public and approved, changed, or disapproved by decision makers from the local level to the city level. It takes approximately 215 days to complete. Julia?
Hey, yeah. So ULURP, I mean, it kind of says it all in terms of like, it is the first kind of standardized way of making these changes. And it kind of gets kicked into action based on a couple different things. One is like if the city buys or sells property, so they acquire property, anything to do with city land. The second, if the city is selecting sites for new community facilities, this could include things like schools, sewage treatment plants, anything that is a public amenity has to go through the ULURP process. Another is when the city proposes new housing or urban renewal plans. This used to, things like imminent domain would fall into this, but really any massive kind of like housing plan. Any plans that are made or changes that are made to the official city map, so to the official city map, the official zoning city map, new road, anything like that gets added, it needs to go through ULURP. Same thing goes for when a whole area such as like CB1, if all of CB1 were to be rezoned, or just CB1's waterfront were to be rezoned, that requires a ULURP process. And then if any developer proposes to build something that is not standard or requires any sort of special approval from the City Planning Commission, that also is required to go through ULURP. So that combination, actually, you guys know better than anyone. I mean, it kicks a lot of projects through this process, which is a good thing. It's just added, kind of like added eyes on it, right? Forced public participation. The ULURP process in general is in kind of like 6 key stages. And as Cesar mentioned, it's mandatory that this whole process be completed in 215 days. So that's kind of like in the city charter. First step is that the city planning kind of validates this as going through the ULURP process. It confirms that the application is official and that it's going through this process. There's a lot of work that happens before a project even gets to ULURP. Things like environmental review. Typically, developers are likely coming to community boards and talking about their process and their project even before you get to ULURP. So hopefully, by the time that it's coming through the ULURP process, you know the developer, you have a sense of what the project looks like, and have already had some awareness or ability to kind of assess for yourself and for the community's sake, like, will this be good or bad? Where should we be looking for pushbacks? So as soon as it gets approved by the city, it goes to the community board. The community board has 60 days to give comments back to the city on what you like about it, what you don't like about it. This can be done through a series of public hearings. There's been cases where community boards haven't taken advantage of this process for one reason or another, and then in which case it goes right to the city. Others, the community board process has been really instructive and hands-on, and a lot of dialogue. So after it goes from the community board, it will go to the borough president. Him or her will take the recommendations of the community board to heart, and they'll also make a recommendation. They have 30 days to do this. Then it goes to city planning commission, who votes on the proposal. Then to city council, who votes on the proposal, and then finally to the mayor. So it's a pretty lengthy process. It's also not linear in this way, in terms of things can get kicked back for review at the community board or the borough president throughout the process. So there is some feedback cycles that will tend to happen. The ULURP is really, it really is the opportunity, and a great opportunity to hear from what the community wants. I know that CB1 has a great history of really like listening via community board meetings and others to folks' opinions about rezonings one way or another. There's so many amazing photos online of folks standing up and kind of giving and speaking from their heart how they feel about things. I think one of the things to really do to make it super successful is to try to be as informed and engaged as early on in the process as possible. So speaking with developers or city agencies who are bringing plans to the table, and kind of sharing concerns even before it goes into ULURP. Because once it goes into the ULURP process, it's that rigid timeline where you might not have as much input on the final output. During the ULURP process, it's really kind of like working to share the work that's already been done in the community, what the community priorities are, meeting with key decision makers, having folks come out, speak up for what they want to see in their community, and making sure that the community board is asking for what they want and then being accountable or holding developers accountable to those asks. So during ULURP or even before, things around zoning and trade-offs can come into play, but also things like community benefit agreements that might inform things like local hire or minority women businesses that folks would like to see on a project. So it can kind of give back to the community's priorities in ways that are related to zoning, but somewhat removed. And then after ULURP, that's when the projects are going to go into place. So just continue to meeting to make sure that developers and others are being true to their word, that agreements are being met, and then continue to go to hearings as designs continue to be kind of like developed and shared.
So after you ULURP, another thing that CB1 has influence over is like special permits and like transferring air rights, or they have the ability to make a recommendation about transferring air rights. So there's two ways of transferring air rights, which one is a zoning lot merger, which is the joining of two or more adjacent lots into one, allowing unused development rights to shift from one lot to another. And the other one is transfer of development rights, TDRs, which is the transfer of unused development right from one zoning lot to another when zoning lot merger is impossible. So going back to 40 Quay Street again, now that we've included the adjacent sites, the lots themselves are, if they're all combined, it would be 80,000 square feet, which is 40 Quay Street, and then 38,000 square feet, which would be the other three lots. And if they did transferable air rights, they would have a max building area of 183,000 square feet. And the air rights from 40 Quay Street would be about 105,000 square feet. So in total, they would be able to build 288,000 square feet, which is approximately 1/3 more than what they could have if they just built to max capacity on their own. Another technique is like the zoning lot merger. Again, this is if those entire lots became one, and this became like a ginormous lot. The lot area would be 118,000 square feet, And if we are, for both of these examples, we're using like the max community facility FAR, which means a 4.8. And that would allow the developer to build as much as 570,000 square feet of of building.
So I think given that impact, and I recognize it's 7:30 right now, we just are kicking out some things to consider. These are questions you guys, I'm sure, have a whole long laundry list of questions that you're finding yourself typically asking, you or community board members, but things like what percentage of residential project is affordable? What does that affordability look like? How will community amenities be provided? How do community amenities advance your mission and your priorities? How will a project enhance or detract from existing neighborhood character? How will the project create welcoming spaces for all CB1's residents, young families, older folks alike? What are the kind of some of these like local higher MWBE project requirements previously mentioned? And then what other properties within, and I think this is part of the requirement, but what other properties will be affected in CB1's boundary area as a result of the variance being approved or not? So those are just some questions to consider. And then really opening up to discussion.
So I know we're short on time, but if you guys have any questions about the presentation itself, please let us know. You guys can also always email us. Go ahead, Del. Oh, you're on mute.
When you make the presentation, will there be time for people to ask questions? When you do this on Thursday?
Yeah, it seems really important. I also think that we're going to need we should like utilize the chat function more. If folks have questions, they can type in and we can kind of like review and address them as we're going. That would be one thing. And I think we need to streamline and tighten and shorten it a little bit so that there's more time towards the end for questions. That was one takeaway I certainly have from this. I'm just going to be taking notes if you see me like looking down. Was there content that was missing or that should definitely be included, content that should be eliminated, or substitutions that should be made?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So are you going to address at all what you found, what kind of an effect you found that the Con Ed site, that two trees bought from Con Ed, did you make any, do you have any opinion? Did you make any kind of, get any sense of the effect that might have on the community, or what we might want to look at more specifically?
So we've definitely started doing that, and we're finalizing it. I just feel like it might be a little bit too much, but yes, that is on its way.
Well, I wonder if, so we were thinking we would use one case study in this presentation just to kind of like drill down on basics. I could see doing something like for the Con Ed site as a reference to that, using case studies to show like a development of that scale and the impact it had. So kind of make the correlation between scale and like how it lands on the ground many years later. I'm wondering if we could include something like that to kind of get at that, Del.
We're going to be grappling with, you know, and they have, I think that their selling point at this point, I think, is that there's going to be affordable housing there. And I just want to, you know, have a, I guess, you know, I always worry developers come and they give us these false impressions really of what they're going to give us. They come and they make people think that the affordable housing is really going to relate to our community. And then sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah. So what's really wonderful about the Con Edison site is that because it's 2 trees and they have that development, they have Domino Park adjacent to it, and they've had similar processes. We're starting to like come up and develop questions as to like, okay, if they did have community engagement, how did that look like? What kind of the designs that the community actually wanted were actually implemented, and what were some of the effects of that development, and how did it like, and the ripple effect that it had on the adjacent properties. Again, these are just questions that to consider when asking developer. I don't think that we have the capacity to like determine all of those things, but certainly like just to like start thinking about what kind of questions to ask, what kind of unintended consequences it might.
Well, I wonder if, going back to that last slide with the questions, I wonder if there's like 5 questions, that's a random number, 5 questions that come up all the time that you're constantly grappling with developers. And we pose it as a question, but then we talk through the rationale about how to evaluate that question. That could be something I could see adding to this that would be applicable to zoning more broadly, or zoning changes more broadly than a specific site. So if one is like what are the appropriate levels of affordability, or the percentage of affordability of housing? Like what is adequate for CB1? Like if that's a question that could be applied to the Con Ed site or to the Quay site or to any other, then what are the factors that we're taking into consideration when assessing, is this developer doing the right thing and kind of the right thing by the community, or should him or her be doing more? That could be one way, if we just highlight a few of those to kind of dive in a little deeper. One thought.
Del, you're muted.
Claim that they're going to provide, and whether it really seems that that open space will be meaningful to us.
I didn't hear what you said, Del.
I said that can you hear me? So I think the consistent question that comes up is the in tangent with the affordability, and whether that really is something that's going to help our community. The open space that they'll always, developers come and they talk about this great open space they're going to provide, and how can we get a sense of whether that amount of open space is actually something that's going to be meaningful to the community, or is it just some token piece of, you know, space? And I think that's always the balance that we're trying to make. It's not always easy to figure that out.
affordability, open public space, and then is there another topic area that comes up a lot? Is there anything about community uses? I think you're on
What, absolutely, that's important.
the same question. Is it community uses that's meaningful and advancing community agenda? Okay.
Another thing that, I don't know why, but I have the echo. Or I hear it myself, maybe you don't. One thing that I was kind of looking for was more information, more stats on the impact of a development like the 1-2 Trees is proposing on the Con Ed site on the current infrastructure, where I don't see like anything mentioned right here in this presentation as to, you know, the number. You said there are 180,000 people that live in the Williamsburg Greenpoint area, but this is going to bring on how many more? 2,000, 3,000? And how many means of public transportation are there? What access to public transportation do we have? We have the L, we think we have the G, we sometimes have the G, and the J or M, which is, as we know, exacerbated with, it's just not enough for the number of riders that currently exist in the community, not to mention what's going to happen with the additional developments that are coming up and the number of families that it's going to bring in. So I was kind of hoping that we saw something more in terms of the impact of these developments on the current infrastructure and what it is when we are asking, what should we be asking? Do we ask, what is the city doing about the public transportation? How is the city addressing the lack of, you know, schools, the number of schools that we have available for the children that are being raised in this community? Post offices. I mean, you talk about food deserts, but yes, food access, affordable food access is important, but many other things as well. And I kind of didn't see that in the stats or included in the conversation, you know, specifically asking when we're meeting with the developers and what we should be asking as it relates to those issues.
Do you think that we should, I hear you, and I think we can definitely build that section out much more. Do you think that there's other areas that we can cut just for sake of timing? I mean, we can include, but then maybe when we go through the training, we can cut certain areas. Were there any areas where you're like, we can skip this?
You know, you're muted.
Oh, I'm muted?
No, Trina.
I think that we can get rid of a lot of the first half, a lot of the historical part, and really use the time to get into the specific issues and just how the committee and the board itself can deal with the issues, rather than the history of zoning and which was all interesting. But I think given the amount of time we have, it makes more sense to focus it on the more tangible aspects.
Okay.
I did like the history of zoning, though. I just have to
I did too, but I think if we only have an hour, it makes more sense.
And honestly, I think that we can record this separately as like a full long version, but I think when we have folks on this next call, it'd be great to have more time for discussion. And so maybe it's like some combination. We keep it in for the presentation that we'll share with you. And then at the training on Thursday, we kind of get through that quickly, maybe pare some slides down and get to what your Del and Maria and Trina were talking about.
It's great though. It's going to be very useful, I think.
This is very great. This is really helpful feedback, genuinely. Is there any, I guess like we decided to focus on Quay just because it felt, I don't know. I mean, I think it was just like easy to get concepts with. Do you think there's a need to explicitly discuss Con Ed or other sites? Or do you think that lessons or like nuggets of information or questions learned, like we were just talking about, can be applied? I think there's also a way that we could kind of talk through some of these questions using the Con Ed site as an example. So maybe all those questions are framed through that project. Caesar and I can think it through. Sorry, I'm talking out loud.
Yeah, I think the 40 Quay site is good, the way you explain FAR with that, but then when you're actually talking about what power what tools that the committee and the board have, it makes more sense to focus more on Con Ed, because that's really coming down the pike.
Okay.
And we've had a lot of, I don't know, you probably know, we've had a lot of heated meetings about Con Ed, and so you heard all the different issues that came up.
Right.
It would be great to have some help, to have the community board have some help with how to best serve the community with those issues and with that.
And in terms of the topics I'm hearing, just to repeat them back, I'm hearing affordability, public open space, community facilities, and infrastructure are 4 like crucial areas. When we get in. Okay.
And real public open space. I don't know if you've seen what they've done. They've presented a very built out, very designed, beautiful park, which is in a very small space, and it's got all the kind of great park design, but it's tiny, and compared to the size of the building, and just there's a little bait and switch that feels
Right. And does it feel more like semi-private or private public space versus public space?
small. I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, Del, I think you're on mute.
So it's technically open to the public, but is it big enough to actually be an amenity that's worthwhile?
Right. In things like size, but also where it's located and how it's situated, all kind of go to affect how welcoming or used it's be.
And also likely like where it's needed, because it's right next to already like it's very, very close proximity to Domino Park already. So it's just going to be a large continuation of very, very well designed park that again may not be for the residents of CB1, or may not attract only CB1 residents.
That's a good point. Any other final thoughts?
Can you hear me now? Yeah, okay. So I think it's going to be a very helpful presentation. So.
Great. I'm excited about what we just discussed and kind of making edits before this next meeting. So that's fantastic. And that one will also be on WebEx, correct?
Is the WebEx something that you feel comfortable doing, or do you have another venue? Or
I'm going to play around with it in the next couple days to like familiarize myself and Caesar even more with like the functions and some of its capabilities. So hopefully it will be super smooth. But this sounds good.
Before we conclude the meeting at any point, I need to go through some strategy information. I need to finalize all of this information tonight. So when you're ready, let me know.
I'm ready.
Okay.
It's me. I don't know.
Okay, so this meeting that we have is coming up on Thursday. This is the meeting that you are running?
Yes. It's going to be a training that will have similar to tonight, Caesar will be kind of controlling the screen. So we'll have access to the screen. We'll do introductions about who we are, who Hester Street is, what we were hired to do. I'm not sure how many people are coming. I mean, ideally, we'd love to start off with an introduction. Everybody goes around and says their name. We might use a chat function so that people can just say, kind of write their name and their connection to CB1 in the chat bar so that we aren't taking up a ton of time on the call. That could be one way to steward that. Did I answer the question?
Basically, yes. I'm just trying to do all the logistics. I understand time is very compressed, and putting these two meetings together without this one that we're having now, it was difficult. So I need to know how to proceed advertising this meeting. Is it something that Hester Street wants to advertise, or do you have a flyer or something? I'm not sure the materials that you were going to provide for that particular need.
I think this is just going out, and I defer to CV1 members, but I think this is just going out to the community board members in general and like your listserv. So anyone who has the time and interest can sit in. Yes, Maria, I'll defer to you.
Yeah, if I may, I'm sorry because I have ADHD, self-diagnosed. Anyways, this is a CB1 thing. This is our thing. We requested this. We were told to do this because we had to. And of course, this is not Hester Street, but this is full transparency. This is something that we had to do in order to spend down those funds that were allocated by the city council. So this is for our community. Therefore, I believe this is for us to advertise to our full board and to anyone in our community. So the full board has to be invited. Anyone like Julia said, that is on the community board's listserv. So that means everyone that's in your database or in your digital Rolodex, whomever you have an email for should get an invitation. I mean, I understand. I mean, Hester Street is the consultant that conducted the study and put together the training and everything else. But I think that the engagement of the community, we own that. And anybody from the committee, please, please provide your feedback if you agree, disagree.
I think that's fine, yeah.
I agree.
Ray,
Marie?
I don't know if she's talking or she's not talking.
No, I'm to you. Does that answer your question, Marie?
Well, I believe it does. And what happens after Thursday? The digital material and all the materials, how will we get that?
We'll be sending them over to you. So we're going to send you over this PowerPoint presentation with associated notes. I mean, not this one, the final version. We're going to send you over a recording of the training. And then we're also going to send you over the actual like sheets, which are kind of like the zoning analysis for the 3 sites we looked at, as well as the individual kind of the community board 1-pagers that we've looked at previously. So I'll send that over the end of this week, and we'll also send over a final invoice.
What about the link that we were talking about?
Yeah, the link to the recording.
Whatever the link was that you said that you were going to use.
Yeah, we'll send you all of that in one. We can put everything on Dropbox, or we'll share it via an email. We'll be sure to get that all to you.
Any questions from the committee?
No?
Thank you all. Really do very much appreciate your input and for participating in this call and look forward to Thursday.
Feedback.
Love it. Okay. Thank you all. Have a good evening.
You're on mute.